Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special battlefield report. Israel killed a major Hamas leader, Yahya Sinwar, the head of the political bureau in Rafah, southern Gaza. He was the mastermind behind the bloody attack on October 7th last year. On the morning of the 16th, an Israeli soldier spotted suspicious individuals in a building in Rafah and opened fire. In the afternoon, soldiers saw three figures trying to move quietly between houses and shot at them, wounding them. The terrorists fled, with two hiding in one building while Sinwar entered another and climbed to the second floor. Israel fired a shell at that building, threw grenades, and deployed drones. A drone captured footage of a masked and injured person sitting in a room. When the terrorist realized the drone was approaching, he grabbed a piece of wood and threw it into masses. Israel then fired a shell at that location. The next morning, on the 17th, the Israeli Defense Forces entered the room, uncovered the face of the body, and finally discovered it was Sinwar. To confirm his identity, they cut off the deceased's finger for DNA testing. It was ultimately confirmed to be Sinwar himself. Found on Sinwar, UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East employee ID card. He was carrying cash, an AK-47 rifle, a lighter. He also had a genuine UNRWA employee ID card. Israel had known for some time that Sinwar was hiding in Rafah. In late August, before fleeing, Sinwar ordered the execution of 6 of his Human Shield hostages. Shortly after, Israeli forces found the bodies of the 6 hostages, then launched a major operation to capture him, killing 26 Hamas members, but Sinwar wasn't among them. This time, the IDF didn't expect to encounter him. It was a stroke of luck, like a blind cat catching a dead mouse. The Israeli government was overjoyed. Defense Minister Gallant said on social media that they would eliminate all terrorists. He also posted a photo with the pictures of 3 terrorist leaders crossed out. 2 were of former Hamas military leader Deif and Hezbollah leader Nasrallah, while 3rd was a blank black photo frame representing Sinwar. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu made a video statement saying Sinwar's death marked the beginning of the end for Hamas. He also addressed Gaza residents, saying this was their chance to be free from Hamas rule. The U.S. government was also pleased. President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and Secretary of State Blinken all expressed their approval. They hope Hamas's next leader will take a different path and not bring more suffering to the Palestinian people. The U.S. also made a point of calling Qatar, where Hamas's top leadership is based, presumably to pass a message to Hamas. Sinwar, nicknamed the Butcher of Khan Yunis, reportedly used headscarves to strangle Palestinians accused of collaborating with Israel. He spent 23 years in Israeli prisons and learned to speak fluent Hebrew. Sinwar's death may accelerate negotiations or cause short-term chaos depending on how various parties react in the stance of the new leadership. However, the war in Gaza is far from over and the situation remains tense. We'll continue to follow subsequent developments. After occupying Vuhledar, Russian forces aimed their offensive northward toward Kurakhove, 20 kilometers away. This location, situated below the Russian army salient near Krasnoarmysk, holds significant strategic value. For Ukrainian forces moving northward, this area can be used to cut off the retreat of Russian troops attacking Krasnoarmysk, while eastward it serves as a springboard for an offensive against Donetsk. Thus, Kurakhove has become a strategic stronghold that Ukrainian forces must defend at all costs. On the 17th, fierce fighting erupted on the southern flank of Kurakhove. The terrain favors Ukrainian defense, resulting in heavy losses of Russian armor. Surviving Russian soldiers can only surrender. According to combat footage, Russian drones fired upon their own soldiers attempting to surrender, preventing them from defecting to Ukrainian forces. This action violates the laws of war. The purpose of Russia's offensive towards Kurakhove's southern flank is to stretch Ukrainian defensive lines. Advancing through fields more than 20 kilometers from supply centers would force them to use dirt roads impassable during the rainy season. Therefore, Russian forces must advance along the road north of Vuhledar, where they can also store equipment and ammunition along the way. Currently, the most intense fighting is occurring around Kostiantynivka, 120 kilometers southeast of Kurakhove. The Russians control the town itself, while Ukrainians control the surrounding fields and settlements. The fields and villages that the Russians want to capture are on high ground, while the road for Russian advancement is in a low-lying area. Open source analysis shows that Ukrainians have established defensive lines on high ground. For Russian forces to reach Ukrainian positions, they need to cross streams and swamps. Moreover, rows of forests on the high ground obstruct the Russian advance. Flanking Ukrainian positions is impossible due to rivers and swamps on the sides. Therefore, they can only attack the Ukrainian southern flank head-on. However, they still need to cross a road parallel to the forest, which is within the 400-meter range of Ukrainian assault rifles. Breaking through this road requires deploying mechanized assault units. Deploying mechanized units also presents problems. A branch of a small river has formed extensive marshland, forcing mechanized units to use bridges to cross. The Ukrainian forces have concentrated artillery fire and drones to strike Russian forces at these points. Moreover, Russian forces are consistently attacking uphill, making their efforts particularly strenuous. Russia can only send waves of mechanized units to deliver infantry to the front of the forest. And each wave consists of company-sized mechanized attacks with over 10 armored vehicles and 150 infantry. Ukrainian drones have detected these tanks. As soon as Russian forces cross the bridge over the river, Ukrainian artillery opens fire. Ukrainians also use heavy drones to remotely deploy anti-tank mines, causing significant losses to Russian armored vehicles. Ukrainian mines have caused several waves of Russian attacks to fail, with dozens of armored vehicles destroyed and likely thousands of soldiers killed. Only at this point did the Russians begin using 2 T-80 tanks equipped with mine-clearing devices to clear the road. However, this didn't help much, as Russian armor was still crippled by anti-tank mines and ultimately destroyed by drone-drop bombs. Surviving Russian soldiers hid in forests and buildings after crossing the river. At one point, a group of Russian soldiers, knowing they would likely be killed by drones, left the forest to surrender to a Ukrainian drone. The Ukrainian drone guided them towards Ukrainian defensive lines. A Russian drone discovered the surrender of Russian soldiers and directly fired artillery at the road they were walking on. When Russian artillery fell, the Russian soldiers in the guiding Ukrainian drone accelerated across the field to avoid the shelling. Unfortunately, the next Russian artillery shell hit its target, killing most of the group. The footage shows only one Russian soldier successfully escaping the commander's punishment. In the end, none of the Russian assault forces managed to reach the heavily guarded Ukrainian forests behind the road. On October 7, Zelensky spoke out again, stating that Western countries have adopted Kyiv's victory plan, but now the Ukrainian team is focusing on discussing how the West can effectively implement the details of their support. In other words, Zelensky is directly pressuring the West to take a stand, either provide money and effort, or publicly deny their cooperative relationship with Ukraine. The logic behind Ukraine's appeal for Western aid is simple. Ukraine is fighting hard on the front lines, shielding Europe from Russia. Isn't it reasonable for Europe and America to contribute some money and help with the fighting? The Americans must either continue supporting Ukraine reluctantly or publicly deny their support, but clearly they don't have the courage to do the latter. For a long time, some politicians similar to Chamberlain have been neither daring to openly cozy up to Putin like Trump, nor willing to sincerely support Ukraine. While loudly proclaiming support for Ukraine to the end, they drag their feet on military aid, seemingly waiting for Ukraine to exhaust itself and seek negotiations. This time, Zelensky's victory plan is throwing the ball back to the West. Are you going to confront Russia together with Ukraine or reveal your true face? Currently, France has already shown its hand. Of the previously promised 3 billion euros in aid, only 2 billion has actually been delivered. The French foreign minister publicly stated a few days ago that the remaining 1 billion euros will not be paid, citing Pétas's budget deficit reaching 6% of GDP. Zelensky believes that the most crucial thing now is for Ukraine to receive an invitation from NATO. Faced with Western politicians using procedures and excuse to evade and deflect, Zelensky's attitude is that while Ukraine understands formal NATO membership is a future matter, they urgently need an invitation now, otherwise, where is the West's sincerity? Moreover, Zelensky has officially reported to the Ukrainian parliament about North Korean troops participating in the war. This means that the Ukrainian war has evolved into a true alliance confrontation. With the opposition having already formed an alliance, how can the West not unite? At this point, Western politicians have limited room for maneuver. What remains is to take a stand, support Ukraine or not. NATO's new Secretary General Rutte was the first to express full support for this victory plan. However, there are constant disputes within NATO and differences between countries are difficult to reconcile. Externally, Rutte can only say we are discussing, while in reality, the parties are at odds. In this predicament, Rutte has been working to mediate between the various positions, trying to reach a consensus. Ukraine hopes to receive this NATO invitation during President Biden's term, which would become a bright legacy in Biden's political career. However, it's clear that interest groups in Washington are unwilling to let the current administration do this. The U.S. Permanent Representative to NATO, Smith, reiterated the previous position, stating that Ukraine is irreversibly moving towards NATO membership, but did not mention any specific timeline. This diplomatic rhetoric is essentially equivalent to not making a substantive statement. And meanwhile, some political scholars in Washington have long warned against allowing Ukraine to join NATO. They believe that once Ukraine, as a buffer zone, disappears, it could trigger a third world war. Both sides have shown their cards, but the gap remains significant. Is it possible for both sides to take a step back? A conservative approach would be to establish a no-fly zone, but the specific scope might lead to another dispute. Ukraine hopes for a no-fly zone covering all unoccupied Ukrainian territory. Russian forces cannot enter this airspace, and NATO air forces would not actively cross the line, while NATO's long-range weapons would remain prohibited from attacking Russian territory. The question is, if Russian military aircraft enter Ukrainian airspace, would NATO dare to shoot them down? This is undoubtedly a thorny problem. Another option is to exclude Sumy and Kharkiv oblasts from the NATO treaty area as they are de facto conflict zones. The most conservative option would be to use the Dnieper River as a boundary with the river's width, providing a buffer space for both sides might be the west bottom line. Once a no-fly zone is established, even with the most conservative option using the Dnieper River as a boundary, the situation in Ukraine would change qualitatively. NATO taking over air defense and the no-fly zone would greatly relieve Ukraine's air defense pressure, directly helping the frontline battles. Outside the no-fly zone in the combat area, Western countries could choose not to intervene, but if Russia disregards the no-fly zone, to ensure effective enforcement of the no-fly order, non-no-fly zone areas of Ukraine would be open to NATO military personnel. At that time, if Ukraine invites Polish NATO units to advance to the northern section of the Dnieper River line and take over the defense of the Ukraine-Belarus border, 10 Ukrainian brigadiers could be deployed to the Eastern Front, greatly unleashing Ukraine's potential. Similarly, Romanian NATO units might advance to the southern section of the Dnieper River. The famous military analyst Gherkin has made similar bold predictions. He pointed out next year Belarus is likely to be dragged in, and even Moldova might not be safe. The possibility of Poland and Romania entering the war cannot be ruled out. If these two moves succeed, it would not only greatly reduce the pressure on Ukrainian forces in terms of manpower and equipment, but would also put Russia in a greater predicament, forcing it to reconsider negotiations. This way, the initiative in the war would shift from Russia's hands to a situation dominated by Ukraine and the West. That's all for today's special report. Thanks for watching, folks. Stay tuned for more of Russia's finest military comedy. Don't forget to like and subscribe for your daily dose of chaos.